You're listening to the 100th episode of What It's Like with Luce, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host Lucy Norris, and on today's episode, I'm chatting with TV host, stylist, entrepreneur, and founder of Kennedy Co Grooming. A life in the world of media wasn't always on the cards for this week's guest. Being fascinated by his surroundings as a child, the TV presenter and style entrepreneur had early ambitions to work as a vet. Realizing this wasn't the path meant for him, he enrolled to study business at university and discovered the media industry during his time there. Starting out as a runner on Ireland AM, he worked hard to build an impressive list of credentials that would eventually lead him to be part of BBC's new makeover show, You Are What You Wear. To share the behind the scenes of his journey thus far, all the ins and outs, here's what it's like to be Darren Kennedy. Welcome, Darren. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me this morning. How I would love to kick everything off, if you don't mind, just taking me back to the very beginning of everything, kind of when you were growing up, when you were discovering what your interests were going to be in life and what that process was like for you.
Well, I guess growing up, I was the middle of three children, and I was absolutely obsessed, and still kind of am, but obsessed with like animals and nature. So much so that, I used to spend my afternoons collecting kind of straw and grass and trying to build nests for the birds to try and encourage them to nest in my garden. And like I'd build these nests with little mud and water and grass and like sit them on the driveway, expecting birds to come and nest in them. And I was always very disappointed when they didn't.
Oh.
And always kind of like, really, intrigued by what was around me in terms of nature. So much so that my first kind of career ambition was to be a vet.
Okay.
And that's what I wanted to do for a number of years, up until I hit about the age of 12 and discovered that I'm exceptionally squeamish. So that's something that hasn't changed either. So then I was like, okay, so I've no idea what I'm going to do now, because I was so hell-bent on being a vet. And then obviously went through school and really fell in love with, it kind of linked back to my love of nature and animals and wildlife, was obviously the notion of traveling the world and seeing different places and seeing where all these animals live, that I loved watching, and was obsessed with David Attenborough. Also kind of wanted to be David Attenborough, still kind of do.
Don't we all?
He's such a hero, such a hero. And kind of linked into that then with school was languages. So I loved languages, and I kind of thought, God, this would be really handy when I go to travel. So got through school, which was an interesting experience, and decided to study languages and business in college. And I did a degree in that, and I did like my third year in Bordeaux, which was an amazing experience. And then I did my finals back in Dublin before getting a graduate program in Paris, where I lived and worked again for another year.
Nice.
And then everything kind of, so that was kind of, they're my kind of earlier years, so to speak.
Yeah, and so, sorry to interrupt you. I'm just curious to know when I suppose your interest in like fashion and media, considering what you do now. I'm so surprised to hear what your initial interests were.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had an interest in fashion and style and aesthetics, kind of pulling it back to, even how furniture is arranged and color and texture. And I never even knew the words for it. And I would, go shopping with my mom as a younger boy. And I always had a very strong opinion when we'd be in the changing rooms about what she wore. I guess my parents they grew up in the 70s and had a very particular style, and they were very much into style. So that obviously rubbed off on me. And I always had a very strong opinion, but I never, to be honest with you, growing up, it never even occurred to me that there was such a thing as kind of working in fashion, or that there were careers to be had. And then my interest in media developed while I was in school, probably in fifth and sixth year, when I was trying to figure out what it is I'm going to do and evaluate what my options were. Obviously, veterinary was off the table. And I hadn't, for some reason, I was drawn towards media. Again, I knew nothing of that world, with no connection with anything to do with the media, with TV, with journalism, nothing whatsoever. So it felt very alien. and almost unattainable. And so I kind of, at that moment in time, I was like, well, what do I love? I love languages. I just want to speak French. I want to learn Spanish. So I kind of followed my nose down that route. And then my dad at one point was like, well, listen, if you can combine it with business, it's no harm. So I did. And then I finished, studies, finished my graduate placements and all those type of things. And I realized that actually I do want to work in media. Didn't know how, didn't know what to do. But what I had started doing while I was in college was I had started working as a runner on the breakfast show Ireland AM. And that was really my first introduction to the whole world of media and TV. And that was a great learning experience. And I was literally making coffee for the guests and meeting and greeting the guests and making sure they were in studio on time and that they had a taxi to take them home when they were done. And that was a really eye-opening experience. And I learned a lot. And then from that, I started doing radio and local radio and kind of just plugging away and kind of figuring out how the industry works. Because again, I had no idea what people did or, how a TV program was made. And I did that. And then I started working in production. So I kind of made the leap then. And I was working behind the scenes on TV shows as a researcher and then as a producer, but at the same time learning and honing my craft on screen. And I worked with some really amazing producers who gave me the time and the scope to explore, I guess, what was my real passion, which was broadcasting. And I used to do stuff on RT2 and they'd let me take half days and I was doing radio and it all kind of built up. But so that's it. That side of it came along, and it does sound like a very kind of long-winded process, and I guess it is. It was kind of trial and error, but I also did a lot, and I really kind of pushed myself in the early days of my career to discover what I like and to learn, and then the fashion side of things kind of came in, and so I worked on the first 3 series of Operation Transformation, which has just completed. I think it's 12 to 13 series. So this will put a kind of timeline on it for you. So I was working in Operation Transformation as a producer for the first 3 years. I was also, by the second year, I was reporting on the Jerry Ryan show. And then by the third year, I was presenting a daily program, kind of a side program on the Operation Transformation website, as well as producing, as well as being a producer. And I also end up styling all the contestants.
So you're busy.
So I was busy. So I had 3 hats. And that came about because after the second year of Operation Transformation, it's just such a beast. You work so hard. It's kind of relentless. You do it because you're passionate about TV and what you're making. But ultimately, at the end of each series, which was maybe 4 months' work, you kind of get a tap on the back and go, well done. And then you were on to the next job, hopefully. So as a freelancer, that was a bit daunting. And I remember feeling just a little bit exhausted and wanting to do something for me, just to take a little bit of time out, a couple of weeks. So I packed myself off to London and I did a few fashion courses. And that's when I set up my own personal styling business. And then the two kind of merged. And that is a really long answer to a very simple question.
No, but it's so interesting to hear, kind of everything that you've been through. And I think so many people from the outside, that maybe don't know anything about the industry and things like that, assume that you just get one job straight away and it kind of makes it for you. So I think it's interesting to hear the amount of hard work and the amount of different things you have to do and be willing to do, as you said, making the coffee and things like that in order to get your break. So I suppose I'm interested to know, from someone that you did a business degree, it's very, like, using air quotes, but let's call it like a stable career choice, all that kind of thing, and then you discover that you had this interest in an industry that's notorious for being a little bit uncertain. You never know where your next job's going to come from, that kind of situation. How are you feeling in terms of dealing with that shift, and how did you make sure that you didn't get lost in the process of transitioning into that kind of an industry when maybe you initially thought you would go a different way?
It was very daunting, and I initially kind of resisted, and it wasn't really resisting, but I remember I was coming towards the end of my degree, and the Ireland AM and the producers in Ireland AM were offering me a job as a researcher. And for some reason, I didn't want to take it. Also, because I wanted to go and live in France, and I wanted that experience, and I wanted to work there. And I did the IBEC graduate program, which still runs today. And I just really wanted to do that. And I kind of just thought, I'm not sure if being a researcher in this type of environment on that particular show was what I would really excel at. Um, and I think I learned, actually, one of the things I learned very young, and I was in tune with at an early age, was following what I'm good at, as opposed to expending a huge amount of energy on things I will only ever be average at, and that there will be people. So, for example, sciences. I was never really good at science, and even no matter how much work I put in, there was always going to be people who were much better. So in my head, I kind of went, well, let them do science, and I'll focus on the things I'm good at. And that was and it was funny because if you look back on my school reports, even as a kid, it says Darren is very good when he applies himself. So I was always good at the things I enjoyed. And then the things that I didn't really enjoy, I just didn't really apply myself. And, the things that didn't come naturally. So I kept that going in my career. And then working in business and kind of the more corporate side of things. I also worked in Google. So when I came back from Paris, having worked there and done a graduate program, my first job was in Google, and I was employee number 40 in Google Ireland, which is now obviously a beast. And that was, a great place to work. And they kind of make it hard for you to leave. But I just knew this isn't my passion. This isn't going to fulfill me long term. I'll make great money, but it's not. I think I'll wither if I work here, and I'll regret it. So I did make the leap, but it was a leap into a world that I had kind of been side paddling all along. So it wasn't a complete shock, and I wasn't starting completely from scratch. Like, I did have an understanding of the industry. I knew where I would excel and what I wanted to do. So it was so daunting because I left a full paid kind of pensionable job, almost against the advice of my parents. Not quite, but they were like, oh, it's a full-time pensionable job. Are you sure? And I just thought, feck it, I'm going to do it. I've only one life. And that's what I did.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so inspirational as well. And I love what you're saying about, actually just going after what you're good at. I think it's such a simple thought, but so many people don't do that, or they let other things get in the way.
Just to build out on that, it's something I've realized. So so that concept in my mind, which was very simple, in actual fact is a much bigger thing. In Japanese philosophy, there's an entire philosophy called ikigai, which is learned later on in life, and it's something that I still kind of pursue. But it's ikigai. I guess we kind of translate it roughly as, your reason for getting out of bed in the morning. And there's kind of 4 paradigms to it, and it's very simple. It's like, so one is, if you can imagine 4 interlocking circles. One is what you love. The other one is what you're good at. Another one is what there's a market for, and what people are willing to pay for. So if you can find that, in the center of all those things is your ikigai. So if you can find that, well, then you're onto a winner. And that's why when people say doing what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, yada, 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 it's kind of true. And if it's just, so if you reflect on it a little bit more, and people can Google ikigai, it kind of makes sense. So in a way, I've been doing that all my life, even in school.
Yeah. It's kind of almost like, I don't know, when people ask like, what's the secret to life, or like the meaning of life and all that kind of thing, that kind of resonates with me as something that would answer that question in a way.
Yeah, like, I'd love to know the meaning of life. I don't. I think that's something we're always working on. But it's,
Yeah.
it's looking at, well, what do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need, and what can you get paid for? And if you can find out, if you can really reflect on all of that and figure that out, I think you're on to a really good starting point.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like, as you said, you've definitely done that, and people can see that in your CV, just the amount of things that you've done. And then the other interesting point I think about kind of the start of your career before you move on to other things later down the line. I was reading an interview that you gave this morning on, I think it was the Irish Times, and just something about something you said struck me, and I wanted to ask you about it. Obviously, if you don't want to talk about it, just let me know. But I read that you said in the beginning, your sexuality was a disadvantage to you. And I know that you made your documentary, Gay Daddy, on parenting as a gay couple. So I'm wondering if you might expand on that and just let me in on what that experience was like for you in the beginning.
Well, I guess it's not, when you're coming to terms with, well, at least in my own experience, when I was coming to terms with my sexuality, it was something that felt very against the flow. And that's the easiest way of describing it, against the flow of society, of everything that I'd seen growing up and experienced. And that felt very challenging. So when, sometimes when you meet resistance, especially when it's deep inside you, it can feel very, the easiest thing can be to try and bury it and ignore it and hope that it's not what you think it is. And then obviously, as time progresses, you realize that that isn't the case. And, this kind of calling inside you, whatever you want to say, it gets louder and louder to the point that the more you ignore it or try and deny it, the more detrimental it's going to be. And I think, it's kind of, it's kind of become a buzzword at the moment, but it is living your authentic life and being true to yourself. And I think the more you try and hide, and when you're not honest with yourself, well, then you can't hit that flow in your life. So actually embracing and coming to terms with that, for me at a young age, was very empowering, because, well, it allows you live your true authentic self. You're not trying to cover, you're not trying to hide. You can embrace who you are and step into that. And that is powerful. And when you're in that flow and you embrace that, in a way, nothing can stop you. And it also, coming to terms for me, and I know from speaking to many other gay people who've come to terms with their sexuality in an environment that maybe wasn't as open to it, it's very hard. It encourages you to self-reflect at a time and an early age in your life where many other people don't have to. And it also creates incredible resilience. And I think they're all qualities and attributes that have stood to me later on in life. And to go back to your previous question, stepping out of a full-time corporate environment to go into a notoriously difficult environment that is TV, that resilience has stood to me and continues to do so.
That's really interesting to hear from you, and I think you're so right about the power of resilience and the power of being your authentic self. I mean, it's kind of an unmatched force, and so many of us spend our whole lives trying to be comfortable with who we are and things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you about that. I was interested to know your take on it. And I suppose where we left off, you'd kind of established this personal styling business for yourself, and you'd moved to London. So can you fill in for me what happened or how your life changed when you did move to London, and how that kind of tied into the progression of your career?
Well, so I didn't really move to London at that point. I kind of went over on short stays,
Okay.
and then it was so basically then I came back and I established myself in Ireland, and I started building up my portfolio of work and writing as a journalist for the Irish Independent, and working on TV, and just kind of building up my own brand now. But I never really saw it as that. I was just building up my business, and then I, as I said, I was working with Operation Transformation. I had done various other, reporting gigs here with Jerry Ryan show and different things, and I kind of felt ready to embark on a bigger scale. And so that's when I kind of started knocking on doors in the UK, and that led me to working with the BBC. So my first gig over there was doing a 13-part show called Project Parent, made by the BBC for CBBC and BBC One. And so that was my introduction there. And, that was an amazing kind of first gig over there. And then kind of things just gathered momentum, and I worked on This Morning, and I worked on various other shows. And my most recent show in the UK was for BBC One primetime, called You Are What You Wear, which was a brand new fashion series on BBC One on Thursday evenings at 8 p.m. And so that's, there's been a lot of other shows and things in between, and I could sit here and bore you to death with a list of credits. But that's kind of been the trajectory. And then in between there, a couple of years ago, I decided to, and I started with a collaboration with Louis Copeland a couple of years back, where we did a tailoring collection that ran for 6 seasons. And then I embarked into the world of men's grooming products with Kennedy Co.
Yeah.
So that was an ambition of mine. So it is interesting. I did set out doing business in college, not really wanting to be in business because I kind of thought that wasn't my forte. And then coming back around, I now have a men's grooming business. So I think the lesson there for me, and I always say this to anybody starting out, is never underestimate. Every experience is a learning. There are learnings in it which you may not realize at the time, but pay attention. And life has a funny way of coming back around. And the grooming business was a huge challenge, and that was because over the past couple of years, I had, the past decade, I was working with the L'Oreals, the Estee Lauders, some of the biggest brands in the world, and I kind of felt there's nothing for men, and there's nothing coming from Ireland, and that was the opportunity. So it took a couple of years to get up off the ground, and Kennedy Co was 2 last November. And we are obviously available in Dunnes stores and pharmacies across Ireland, and places like the Kilkenny store and Shaw's department store. But we're also in the UAE and Qatar, and we launched in the UK last year on Amazon. So that's, it's exciting. It's full on. It's a tough business, but it's another part of my world that I really enjoy.
Yeah, it's so cool. I always think it must be so cool to, if you build a product, to see it on the shelves in some of the, your favorite stores and things like that. So congrats. That's amazing that you got that off the ground. And so I guess I'm curious within that as well, entrepreneurship, it's a whole other sector, as much as it ties into like personal branding and that kind of thing that you'd already established through the media side of things. What were the challenges that you initially faced as a new entrepreneur launching your business?
Oh God, they're manifold. Well, it wasn't my first business. So when I launched my personal styling business, I kind of pivoted a section of that to an online publication, which was, 12, 13 years ago. So it predates a lot of even the popular titles going online now. So that was a lifestyle magazine online. And that was I used to run awards, and we did various different things with that. So that was kind of my first foray. And then setting up then the grooming business is a completely different beast. Because you get into manufacturing, into sourcing, into retail, distribution, testing of products, trademarking, all these different things. So it is a beast, and has been a steep learning curve. And I continue to learn. I mean, every day I'm learning new things, and I think that's part of what I love as well. And there are certainly, as much as there are highs, there are so many challenges. But that's kind of, for me, is the part that I find fulfilling.
Yeah, I'm sure. And yeah, I can't even imagine where you would begin with all the sourcing and all that kind of thing, especially with beauty product, or not beauty products, but grooming products, I feel, because there's so much other things that goes into it. There's even science, I'm assuming, all that kind of thing in the background.
Yeah, there's the work in the lab, there's the functions, I'm very involved in every aspect of that. And, I was very specific in the product that I wanted to create as well. So yeah, so it doesn't happen overnight, but it is rewarding, and it is great to go into Dunnes stores and to see our products standing proud there in the shelf, and to be honest, the greatest fulfillment is when I hear from people feedback on the products, and how in some cases it has kind of changed their world. It's settled in their skin, it's done amazing things, and for other people it's just like, I love, it's the only hair product that I use, I love it, and that's just really rewarding.
I suppose you have a lot of things going on. You've kind of tapped into a lot of different industries between heavy fashion work, TV presenting, and entrepreneurship as well. So, what does the future hold for you? Do you think you'll continue to bring those kind of, if you want to call it like three pillars together for your life, or are you going to venture off into one more heavily, or what do you see happening for you?
Do you know what? I will continue to follow my curiosity,
Love that.
and that's, and follow my nose and follow my gut, my intuition. I want to grow and continue to expand on those three pillars and more. I've no doubt there's a lot more. I don't know what they are yet. I'm always, I'm always curious about things, and I'll always go off on tangents, and that's what I enjoy. I think if I get stuck doing any one thing for too long, I don't enjoy that. I love starting new things, growing them, building them, and kind of uh, getting them to a point where I can do that again somewhere else. So, new TV shows, I'm constantly developing new TV formats, and working on new projects, exploring new markets, meeting new people. That's what I really, that's what I love as well. So who knows? Staying curious, I think, is probably the key.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important as well. And it all ties back into what you said. I can't remember the word right now, but um
Ikigai,
yeah,
ikigai.
ikigai, yeah. And so on the back of that, I'd be so curious to know what your personal definition of success is.
I think if you associate success just with your professional life, you're missing a trick. And success for me is being happy in the day to day, and being able to do nice things and enjoy being with my family and friends. And that's ultimately what the success is for me. Um, and actually, I've realized that I need very little to be happy, and that, I think, is a success.
Yeah, definitely. I think in the world we live in now where everything is so, it's all like instant gratification. Everyone has so much stuff. There's so much things online of like superficial success, how many cars you have, all that kind of thing. So it's refreshing to hear from someone that has had so much success in their career that, it's the simple things in life that are actually what's going to
It
make you happy.
really is. And, I love to spend my time, my energy, my money on experiences over, material things. Don't get me wrong, like, material things are nice, but ultimately they don't bring you long-term joy or happiness. And yeah, so that's what I really enjoy. Like, obviously, when we can, traveling, going to nice places, experiencing new things and new cultures. That's, yeah. So, like, I'm actually, I feel very fortunate in life, and I'm very happy and content. And long may that continue.
Yeah, definitely. That's great to hear. And then I just have one more question for you, and I'm going to let you get on with your Friday morning. If I put your 10-year-old self in front of you today, having been through everything you've been through, both in your career and your personal life, just life in general, I suppose, what's the biggest piece of advice you would give that 10-year-old self moving forward?
Trust in everything you do. It's going to lead you in the right path, and just be honest. That's probably it. I think just be honest and trust, and you won't go far wrong.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great pieces of advice. And I think everything that you've said today will resonate with people listening. So I just want to thank you so much for giving up your time. Again, I know you're
My
so
pleasure.
busy with all your different projects, so I really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. Lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much for listening and for all the support thus far. I can't believe we've already made it to 100 episodes. I have thoroughly enjoyed every single conversation that I have got to have with some incredible people and everything I'm learning along the way. If you do like what you hear, don't forget to rate, share, and leave a comment, and follow @whatitslike_pod on Instagram and Facebook to keep up to date with everything that's happening here on the show. To find out more about Darren and his companies, visit the links provided in the show notes. I'll be back with season 2 very soon, but for now, this has been What It's Like with Luce.